Villain, antagonist, whatever you want to label this man. The theory I'm about to throw out there is a 1% chance, 99% faith kind of thing, and that is faith in PTJ. Though to me, it is likely of happening, but if you're interested in theories, this video is just about the perfect video for you, because this theory is the most theoretical thing I've ever cooked up by far. This theory actually dates back to about 3 chapters ago, which was chapter 569 if I'm not mistaken, when I pointed out that Lineman is PTJ's embodiment of transformation. This wasn't exactly something out of the ordinary or anything. When you take a character like Lineman and turn him from the Usopp of Lookism that he used to be into an absolute machine when it comes to beating up fodders and being photogenic, that's transformation personified. The reason I pointed this out though is because PTJ pretty much confirms this through Lineman's tattoos, which are the hidden dragon on the back, which symbolizes the hidden dragon and how whenever he has his jacket on it would be hidden, but only when he's fighting is it actually revealed that he is a dragon. And the tattoo on the front of the koi fish, which is PTJ incorporating more Chinese mythology into his story. We've seen mythology incorporated into manga and manhwa before, this isn't anything new. Take the Elbaf arc from One Piece as an example, with the Norse mythology and everything. And in fact, this isn't exactly the first time Chinese mythology has been incorporated into Lookism anyway. Chinese mythology has actually been an overarching factor of the pre-generation story that was disregarded, primarily due to the fact that we don't know much about the pre-generation itself, and we don't have a full-blown pre-generation arc yet. Every Lookism character, or almost every Lookism character, comes with their title. You have Gun, the White Demon, Sinuhan, the Boy of Promise, Kite Kim, the Kingslayer, and as for Gapryong Kim, this title would be the Dragon. He's been referred to as the Dragon on many occasions in the series by the likes of Taesu, Lightning Choi, so on and so forth. But what does a dragon actually mean? For Gun, the White Demon is a title given to him as the leader of the Yamazaki Syndicate. For Kite Kim, Kingslayer is a title given to him for being able to take down first generation kings with ease, Jinrang and Jichang being the embodiment of that, as he became the first generation king of Seoul and threw that whole title away for bigger things in his opinion. Well, in Gapryong's case, Dragon, the title given to him, is actually another reference to Chinese mythology, and the first ever reference to Chinese mythology PTJ makes in Lookism, and that is to the story of the dragon and the tiger. The dragon and the tiger virtually resemble yin and yang in Chinese mythology, with the tiger being yin and the dragon being yang, contrary to popular belief. The dragon in Chinese mythology takes up many forms, and this is portrayed through Lookism, as well as PTJ seems to have educated himself about this to a fairly adept degree before incorporating it into his series in such a predominant way. The celestial dragon, which is pretty much just the imagery of the dragon in a generalized way, represents active heavenly power, and this was shown in Lookism. The tiger represents passive earthly strength, which was also shown through Lookism, though it does slip under the radar due to people not really knowing the pre-generation was based on Chinese mythology this heavily. Hell, even I discovered this just a couple weeks ago. As I mentioned, Lineman represents the tail of the koi fish that turns into a dragon through the Dragon Gate. But what does Gapryong, what does Shingen, and what does Paecheon represent? Well, let's go a bit deeper, shall we? Starting with Gapryong, as stated, he resembles a dragon, but more specifically, the dragon he is based off of is one that I had been speculating he would be based off of ever since I dove into this rabbit hole. And to my pleasant surprise, PTJ confirms this in the latest chapter, but again, it slips under people's radars. This time, however, it doesn't slip under people's radars for the same reason. It slips under their radars because it wasn't exactly in the chapter. You see, PTJ writes and draws chapters in advance. Nowadays, I'm hearing he has a full-fledged art team and no longer draws Lookism, which is false. But the point is, when chapter 572 of Lookism is released on Naver Webtoon, that obviously doesn't mean PTJ drew or wrote the chapter. It got the chapter done pretty much last week. PTJ actually gets chapters done in advance, which was the general consensus for a while and was later proven by PTJ himself through a screenshot he posted on his Naver profile, where at the time chapter 492 or 493 had been the latest chapter released. However, the file for chapter 496, which is the chapter Kite Kim, finally made his appearance, as well as the chapters before that which hadn't been released yet were present. There's also the image up on the screen right now of PTJ reaffirming this. So we know PTJ doesn't write chapters just before the deadline, he gets them done in advance. Okay, what does that even mean? Well, it means that when PTJ sends the chapter, as he sends it to multiple parties, some parties get an unedited or not finalized version of the chapter. Meanwhile, the version of the chapter posted on Naver is the final one. Therefore, there is a Chinese or Taiwanese as well as other versions of the chapter out there, which some people misinterpret to be that country editing the chapter to cater it to the audience of that country, when it's really just an unedited version of the chapter PTJ sent before actually posting it on Naver. This happens with literally every chapter, and for chapter 572, the unedited version of the chapter seemingly confirms what I thought. Gapryong Kim is based on the Yinglong, or the yellow armored dragon. Pchon is the person who states this whilst addressing Lineman, and what he basically tells him summarized is, "You're not strong enough to beat me, though you put up a valiant effort, but if you want to beat me, go bring the golden armored dragon," or in other words, Gapryong Kim. He then mentions Shingen Yamazaki, but I'm not going to go into that just yet. So far, we've established that Chinese mythology plays a vital role role in Lookism, and that Lineman is a minor embodiment of this through the tail of the koi fish and the hidden dragon on his body, and that the pre-generation's top tiers are the major embodiment of this. So let's continue. A little bit more proof that Gapryong and Shingen's rivalry is based on Chinese mythology, and more specifically the tail of the dragon and the tiger, is observing Gapryong's opponents or rivals at certain periods of his reign that helped them get stronger pretty much. Assuming that there is a correlation between Gapryong the dragon and his rivals in the tiger, we should be able to find a connection in Lookism between Gapryong's opponents and said tiger. Starting with Baeko Kwan, the word Baeko quite literally just means white tiger in Korean. Moving on to Elite, who was probably Gapryong's most formidable opponent before Shingen. This man refers to himself as a tiger in his fight with Ji Chang. And finally Shingen, I don't even think this one needs explaining, he's the tiger demon. So all three of Gapryong's opponents that we know of seem to have a correlation to the tiger, the white tiger, whom the white tiger drop center was named after. Coming to this revelation helps us understand the power hierarchy in Lookism and why Gapryong was always perceived to be at the top. Gapryong, based on the Yinglong, represents the yang in the situation. Meanwhile, his opponents, Baeko Kwan, the white tiger, Elite, the tiger, and Shingen, the tiger demon, and father of the white demon, all represent the yin in this situation. And the winner in all three exchanges, and the person who was blatantly just superior in terms of strength, is Gapryong Kim. Therefore, if you're picking up what I'm putting down and are on board with the idea that the pre-generation is pretty heavily influenced by Chinese mythology, this would be PTJ's didactic message that a dragon is always superior to a tiger, and the tiger represents the level below what we consider to be the pinnacle in Lookism, and those who stand literally at the top are dragons. Not just any dragon though, because there's another hierarchy between them as well, and what I mean by that is the hidden dragon, Lineman, does not sit on the same pedestal as Gapryong Kim, neither does Lightning Choi, though I do believe Lightning Choi, just like Lineman, had to hold off Shingen in the pre-generation for his friends to get here. Now let's move on to our current timeline of events, having set our foundation that the pre-generation is influenced by Chinese mythology and that Gapryong represents the golden armored dragon according to Paecheon, which is likely general consensus, at least in China and Korea. Meanwhile, his opponents represent the white tiger, as well as the narrative painted by PTJ of dragons being stronger than tigers. What about Pchon Jo himself? I made a remark in my most recent video, or perhaps the one before that, I don't exactly remember, that Paecheon was also based on another figure in Chinese mythology, but just in case you didn't see that, I'm gonna break the entire thing down here. The bottom line is, before we move on to the meat and potatoes of it, there is a very real possibility that Pchon Jo is the strongest Lookism character yet, or the person that stands directly below Gapryong in that regard. Now of course, we've seen nothing from Paecheon other than him fingering a couple people violently and aggressively, and though a wise man once said to never judge a book by its cover, I'm afraid that wise man wasn't equipped with the curiosity of a Lookism reader. Pchon Jo, ever since his introduction, has always been one of the most mysterious Lookism characters literally ever. Seems to be the only pre-generation member still as active as he is and in pursuit of his mission, which is to take over South Korea starting with Incheon. His appearance, though it may appear arbitrary, actually has a very insightful implication, which was one of the keys to me coming to the conclusion I'm currently at, which I'll delve deeper into in a second. Paecheon has made it his goal to take over South Korea, sure, but more importantly, his goal was to do what Shingen couldn't, which Paecheon attributes to his identity. This was confusing to us as readers at first, but chapter 572 clarifies that Paecheon disliked Shingen truly, and he calls him a coward on multiple occasions because he interpreted the Yamazaki not wanting China to interfere in their affairs as them being scared, which could be a fair assessment, but in my opinion isn't, because Shingen and Shintaro are not really weaklings or cowards by any means, but it's what Paecheon thought at the time. So he claims to be stronger and better than Shingen, and in the latest chapter he implies Gapryong Kim would be needed to take him down. So who exactly is Pchon Jo, and just how strong is he? As explained by the latest chapter, he is one of the 7 stars of the continent, which is a nickname for the 7 absolute masters of China. If I'm not mistaken, that puts him at a standing relative to Zhu Pengwan from what I've heard, though I haven't seen Manager Kim or any other PTJ manual, so I wouldn't exactly know. Regardless, we know where Pchon Jo came from, but in regards to who he is or who he's based on in Chinese mythology, this is a question yet to be answered by PTJ, but I think I might have just found the answer before he even gives it out. As I mentioned earlier, there's a hierarchy between dragons and Lookism. There's Gapryong based on the golden armored dragon, and Lightning Choi and Lineman, the hidden dragons of their respective generations, which aren't on the level of Gapryong. And what this means is a certain dragon could be stronger than another, and it also means that not every dragon is on the level of the white tiger. So the consensus that dragons are stronger than tigers only applies to dragons in Chinese mythology of high standing, and ladies and gentlemen, Paecheon seems to be based on a dragon of very high standing. There's no other way to go about this than from the beginning, and that is me mentioning the koi fish narrative of Lineman. This is something I mentioned in my latest video if I'm not mistaken, which some of you doubted, but it turned out to be true, so I'm gonna explain it here. The narrative of the koi fish that turns into the hidden dragon is not just that simple. It's not just a koi fish that flows through a river and just turns into a dragon. That isn't what transformation is about. You don't just continue to be who you are until you're not. You have to go through trials and tribulations and completely erase who you once were to grow into someone different. And in the narrative of the koi fish that turns into the hidden dragon, which has many different iterations. One of said iterations goes as follows. The koi fish flows through the river and is met with a crocodile. This crocodile reveals itself to not be an ordinary crocodile, but a dragon named the Jaolong, having destructive capabilities second to none, and in order for this Jaolong to prove itself worthy of being a Jaolong and not just a crocodile, it must undergo something called a thunder test, where it is smited thousands of times with lightning and thunder until it becomes a Jaolong. It is already a Jaolong when stumbled upon by the koi fish, and in order for the koi fish to prove itself worthy of the title of the hidden dragon, it must encounter and prove itself to a dragon, that being the Jaolong in this case. Does that sound familiar at all? A crocodile, or in other words, the head of the Dark Crocodile Society, the Dark Crocodile himself, the man with crocodile-scaled skin, Pchon Jo, encountering Lineman in the latest chapter and being subject to his lightning-trailed attacks, only for it to prove ineffective against Paecheon, as he is no longer just a crocodile. He literally is the Jaolong, and it was through encountering Paecheon that Lineman was able to prove himself worthy of not just being a koi fish, but actually being the hidden dragon of the second generation. So in summary, Paecheon, much like Gapryong, is based on a dragon that disguises itself as a crocodile merely to reveal when finally interacted with that it is no crocodile, it is a dragon with destructive capability not to be tampered with, as showcased through the brutal beating Speed and Lineman received that ended in potentially the death of Lineman, though I don't think he's gonna die just yet. So what does this mean for Paecheon? Who is the Jaolong? How strong is the Jaolong? Is it stronger than the white tiger? Is it potentially even stronger than the Yinglong? These are most likely the questions circulating in your head right now, and I'm gonna try to answer every single one of them. What this means for Paecheon is that first of all, if this is the case, PTJ is an absolute genius for making the entire community think this guy was a fraud, a crocodile, when in reality he's much stronger than you would think he is, as shown through the community's reaction to the latest chapter, as a notable portion of the community went from hating on Paecheon to respecting him. It also means that he wasn't a chump, he was and is one of the strongest members of the P-generation, and the only way to find out how strong he truly is to delve into the Jaolong itself. The Jaolong, put into simple terms in Chinese mythology, is simply not stronger than the golden armored dragon, or in other words the Yellow Emperor. And what this means for Paecheon is that in his current form, that which he implies in the latest chapter through the phrase the being that I am, he is not stronger than Gapryong Kim and would likely get beaten by him in pretty brutal fashion. However, when it comes to the white tiger, this is completely different. The Jaolong versus the white tiger is a much closer fight in Chinese mythology, and though the white tiger takes a slight edge in its own setting, it is generally agreed upon that in the setting of the Jaolong, which in this case we can refer to as taking over South Korea, the Jaolong would be stronger. However, I still do believe Shingen would beat Paecheon in his current form, and the reason for which is as follows. Paecheon is in base. The Jaolong, which is the aquatic dragon or the flood dragon in Chinese mythology, though evolved from the crocodile, is actually not the final form of this creature. The being that Paecheon says he is, I'm afraid, has multiple layers to it, and this is where it gets interesting. This is the reason for the title behind the video in the first place, as Paecheon was shown to be guarding a vault in the Dark Crocodile Society's fort, that which contains the Hwarang sword, yeah, the one implied to be able to cut down goblins, or in other words, Shingen and gun, yeah, that same sword. First of all, there's your direct implication that the Hwarang sword to Paecheon is the paternal version of what it is to Gu, as to him, it is what he needs to surpass Shingen, meanwhile to Gu, it is what he needs to surpass Gun. Speaking of Gu, he just made his appearance in the ending of the latest chapter to nobody's surprise. This also has its implications. Gu just arrived, and just as everybody's speculating, Gu is most likely going to be Paecheon's final opponent in this arc. He's going to be the person that takes him down and takes the Hwarang sword from him. But dude, weren't we just talking about Paecheon being based on Chinese mythology? What the fuck happened to that? Are you saying Gu Kim versus Pchon Jo is also a part of Chinese mythology? Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying actually. The evolved version of the Jaolong is the Yinglong, a dragon far superior to the Jaolong, far stronger than the white tiger, and on the same standing as the Yinglong, which is the dragon Gapryong is based on. The Yinglong is most likely what PTJ is gonna embody as Paecheon with the Hwarang sword. It is what Paecheon needs to be in order to truly surpass Shingen, and the Hwarang sword makes the Jaolong the Yinglong and puts Paecheon up there with Gapryong at the pinnacle of the verse. However, not to make this too overcomplicated, but their fight, Gu and Paecheon's fight, is also part of Chinese mythology. You see, the Yinglong has many opponents, and one of them is the Qiyu. The Qiyu is the Chinese god of war and god of weapons, and in their battle, the Yinglong quite literally kills the Qiyu. Does this mean Paecheon with the Hwarang sword is gonna kill Gu Kim? You could look at it like that, but my trust in PTJ tells me otherwise. In my opinion, it's gonna go down as follows. Jade Kim is gonna show up and use Jinrang's teachings on Paecheon, but likely lose. Daniel will have the same happen to him, and I think Paecheon's final opponent after this entire debacle is gonna be Gu Kim, and in order for Gu to actually take Paecheon down, he's gonna have to unlock his path and take Paecheon down with the Hwarang sword in order to actually surpass Gun indefinitely. My theory on what's gonna happen is still iffy though. However, I can say I'm certain Paecheon is based on the Jaolong and is likely gonna evolve into the Yinglong by the time he faces off against Gu. However, it's up to you to interpret this video how you may. This does pose one final question though, and that question is, just how strong is Yu Gang Ha?